An elderly woman passed away and hadn't updated her will in over 30 years. When her children discovered that a longtime friend had inherited everything, they were forced to confront painful family secrets. Elijah Harper parked his rusted hatchback in front of the family home, its peeling white paint and sagging porch more a testament to the passage of time than any effort to maintain it. The air was heavy with the scent of wet grass, and the overgrown lawn only added to the house's forlorn appearance. He sighed, gripping the steering wheel tightly before stepping out. The place was no longer his, but his siblings had insisted on gathering here to go over Amelia Foster's will. As he approached the front door, it swung open, and his older sister, Harper Quinn, greeted him with a tense smile. Harper's tailored pants and pristine blouse contrasted sharply with the disheveled state of the house, a stark reminder of how she had always managed to keep herself together, no matter the chaos around her. "You're late," Harper said, brushing past him to prop the door open wider. "Dominic's already here." Elijah frowned. "Dominic? Who's that?" "Victoria's lawyer," Harper said. Her tone clipped. "You'll see." The mention of Victoria Lane made Elijah's jaw tighten. He hadn't seen much of her growing up, but the woman had always been a shadow in their mother's life. A friend who seemed to know more about Amelia than her own children did. That Victoria was now in the center of this mess was no surprise, but it still made Elijah's stomach churn. Inside, the living room was crowded with familiar faces. Clara Mason, Elijah's younger sister, sat on the faded floral couch, her toddler on her lap. Nathaniel Cross, the baby of the family, leaned against the wall, arms crossed and eyes fixed on the man standing by the mantel, Dominic Price. Dominic exuded confidence, his tailored suit immaculate and his slicked-back hair gleaming under the dim light of the chandelier. He held a leather briefcase in one hand and a stack of papers in the other. When Elijah entered, Dominic's sharp eyes flicked to him, appraising him with a quick, practiced glance. "You must be Elijah," Dominic said, offering a hand that Elijah reluctantly shook. "Dominic Price. I represent Victoria Lane in matters concerning your mother's estate." Elijah released his grip, folding his arms. "Why does Victoria need a lawyer for my mother's estate?" Dominic's smile was polite but strained. "As you're aware, your mother's will is quite old. Over 30 years, in fact. Victoria Lane is the named beneficiary of the estate, as stipulated in the document." The room fell silent, the weight of the words settling like a heavy fog. Elijah glanced at his siblings. Harper's lips were pressed into a thin line. Clara looked stunned, and Nathaniel muttered a quiet curse under his breath. "That doesn't make any sense," Clara said, bouncing her toddler absently. "Mom wouldn't leave everything to Victoria. She barely mentioned her in the last few years." Dominic opened his briefcase and pulled out a copy of the will. "The document is valid and legally binding. Unless there's evidence to suggest undue influence or lack of capacity at the time of its drafting, there is little room for contestation." Elijah snatched the paper, scanning it quickly. The language was clear. Victoria Lane was to inherit the house, all savings, and Amelia's personal belongings. Nothing had been left to her children. "This is insane," Elijah said, his voice rising. "Why would she cut us out? We're her family." Dominic's expression didn't waver. "That's a question only your mother could answer. My job is to ensure her wishes are carried out." "Her wishes?" Nathaniel said, his voice bitter. "She made this will decades ago. Who knows what she'd want now?" Harper raised a hand, her tone measured. "Look, yelling isn't going to change anything. We need to think about our options." "Our options," Elijah said, rounding on her. "Harper, she gave everything to a woman we barely know. You're okay with that? Harper sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. No, I'm not. But we need to be smart about this. If the will holds up, we're out of luck unless we can prove something's wrong. Dominic cleared his throat. If you choose to pursue legal action, I recommend consulting an estate attorney. I'm confident the will would hold up in court, but that is, of course, your prerogative. Elijah glared at him. Why are you so confident? What does Victoria have to do with all this? Dominic's expression remained impassive. Victoria Lane was a close friend of your mother's for many years. She supported her through difficult times and was entrusted with your mother's legacy. That's all I can say. Clara stood, shifting her toddler to one hip. She supported her? What does that even mean? Dominic glanced at his watch. I've said all I'm able to at this time. If you have further questions, I suggest taking them up with Victoria directly. With that, he gathered his papers, offered a curt nod, and left the house, leaving a tense silence in his wake. Later that evening, Elijah found himself pacing the creaky floorboards of his old bedroom. The room was almost exactly as he remembered it. His childhood desk still sat by the window, and the peeling wallpaper carried the faint scent of dust and age. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than what Dominic had revealed. Driven by frustration, he made his way to the attic. The narrow staircase groaned under his weight, and the dim light from the single bulb overhead cast long shadows across the space. Boxes were stacked haphazardly, their labels faded with time. Elijah began rifling through them, searching for anything that might explain his mother's decision. After nearly an hour of searching, he found a box marked with Amelia's handwriting. Keepsakes. Inside, he discovered a collection of old photographs, letters, and sketchbooks. Many of the photos featured Amelia and Victoria in their younger years, their smiles bright and carefree. But what caught Elijah's attention was a single, folded letter tucked into one of the sketchbooks. The letter was addressed to Victoria. Amelia's handwriting was shaky, as though written in a moment of vulnerability. Victoria, you've been there for me in ways no one else could. I can never thank you enough for keeping my secret all these years. You were right. It's not something the kids need to know. They wouldn't understand. But I trust you to do what's best when the time comes. You've always known me better than anyone. With love, Amelia. Elijah read the letter twice, his mind racing. Keeping my secret. What secret? And why would Amelia trust Victoria over her own children? The questions burned in his chest, and he felt an urgent need to confront Victoria. The next morning, Elijah drove to Victoria's house, a modest bungalow on the outskirts of town. The garden was overgrown, and the paint on the shutters was peeling, but the place had a quiet charm. He hesitated before knocking on the door, unsure of what he would say. Victoria opened the door slowly, her face lined with age, but her eyes sharp and calculating. She didn't seem surprised to see him. Elijah, she said, her voice calm. I wondered when you'd come. Elijah clenched his fists, fighting to keep his tone steady. I want answers. Why did my mom leave everything to you? What secret was she talking about? Victoria stepped aside, motioning for him to enter. The interior of the house was simple, with mismatched furniture and shelves filled with books and knickknacks. She gestured for him to sit, but he remained standing. Your mother trusted me, Victoria said, settling into a chair. She knew I'd protect what mattered most to her. And what was that? Elijah demanded. Because it sure wasn't her family. Victoria's gaze didn't waver. It was the truth. Elijah frowned, his anger flaring. Stop talking in riddles. What truth? Victoria sighed, her shoulders sagging slightly. It's not my story to tell, but if you really want to know, you'll find it in the attic. The sketchbook with the blue cover. Your mother left it for you. Elijah's frustration grew. I already found it. What does it mean? What was she hiding? Victoria stood, her expression softening. Go back and look again. You'll understand when you're ready. Elijah stared at her, his chest tight with unspoken words. Finally, he turned and left, the sound of the door closing behind him, echoing in his ears. Back in the attic, Elijah opened the sketchbook again, flipping through the pages until he reached the end. This time, he noticed a folded piece of paper tucked into the back cover. It was another letter, this one addressed to all of them. To my children, it began. There are things I never told you because I wanted to protect you. But now, I realize that the truth is the only way forward. Elijah's breath caught as he read on, the weight of her words unraveling the life he thought he knew. Elijah sat on the attic floor, the letter trembling in his hands as he read it again, his breath catching on every word. His mother had written it with painstaking honesty, her words weaving together pieces of a past he'd never known existed. It wasn't just a note, it was a confession. She began with an apology, addressing each of her children by name. She wrote about her failures, her regrets, and her reasons for keeping secrets, that now, in death, she realized had only created more distance between them. She described a time before any of them were born, when life was simpler, but marked by a decision that would follow her for the rest of her days. Your father was my first and greatest love, she wrote. But before him, there was someone else. I was young, naive, and I made a choice that changed everything. I gave up a child for adoption, a daughter. I told no one except Victoria, who stood by me through it all. She promised to keep my secret, even from you. Elijah's throat tightened as he read. The words felt surreal, like they belonged to someone else's life, not his mother's. He had grown up believing Amelia was a woman of unshakable resolve, someone who wore her grief quietly, but had no skeletons in her closet. This revelation shattered that image. He wasn't angry, at least not yet, but the weight of the truth pressed down on him, leaving him hollow and breathless. He flipped the page, and there was more. Victoria wasn't just a friend, his mother wrote. She had been instrumental in helping Amelia navigate her darkest moments, including the decision to leave everything to her. The house, the savings, the belongings. It had all been a way to ensure Victoria could carry out her final wishes. Amelia had planned for Victoria to find the daughter she'd lost and provide for her, in a way Amelia never could. I didn't tell you because I was afraid. I didn't know how you would look at me afterward, and I couldn't bear to lose you too. But I see now that hiding the truth only creates walls, and I don't want that for you. Please, forgive me. Elijah let the letter fall into his lap, his hands shaking. His siblings had to know about this, but he couldn't decide how to tell them. The anger they all felt toward Victoria would only intensify, and Elijah wasn't sure he could manage the fallout, but he couldn't keep this to himself either. He spent the rest of the evening sitting in the attic, staring at the scattered belongings around him, as if they could somehow explain what Amelia had left unsaid. The house, once a place of memories, now felt like a puzzle he was only beginning to piece together. When he finally emerged, it was well past midnight. The house was quiet, save for the creak of the floorboards beneath his feet. Harper's car was still parked outside, and a faint light glowed from the living room. Elijah found her sitting on the couch, a glass of wine in her hand, and her face drawn with exhaustion. "Couldn't sleep?" Harper asked without looking up. "Something like that," Elijah replied, sinking into the chair across from her. "I found something in the attic, something Mom left for us." Harper's eyes flicked to his face, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then handed her the letter. Harper took it, her expression unreadable as she read. When she finished, she set the paper on the coffee table and stared at it for a long moment. "A sister," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "She never told us." Elijah shook his head. "She only told Victoria, and that's why she left everything to her, to make sure this other daughter, whoever she is, would be taken care of." Harper leaned back, closing her eyes. "God, Elijah, what are we supposed to do with this?" "I don't know," Elijah admitted, "but we can't ignore it. Nathaniel and Clara need to know, and we need to talk to Victoria again. She's the only one who can fill in the blanks." Harper sighed, rubbing her temples. "This is going to tear us apart, isn't it?" "Maybe," Elijah said quietly. "But it's the truth, and we can't keep running from it." The next morning, Elijah called Nathaniel and Clara to the house, insisting it was urgent. Nathaniel arrived first, his usual laid-back demeanor replaced by visible tension. Clara followed soon after, her toddler in tow, and her face tight with worry. When they were all gathered in the living room, Elijah handed them the letter. He watched as their expressions shifted. Confusion, disbelief, anger, all cycling through as they read. "This can't be real," Nathaniel said, pacing the room. "A sister? She had a whole other kid, and we're just now finding out?" Clara hugged her toddler tightly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Mom must have been so scared. Can you imagine carrying that secret for so long?" Elijah cleared his throat. "Victoria knows everything. She was the only one Mom trusted with this. If we want answers, we have to talk to her." Nathaniel scoffed. "Talk to her? She's the reason we're in this mess. She manipulated Mom into giving her everything." "That's not what happened," Elijah said, his voice firm. "Mom made this decision. Victoria didn't force her. She was just carrying out Mom's wishes." Nathaniel shook his head, anger radiating off him. "I don't care. She owes us an explanation." Harper stood, her tone calm but resolute. "Nathaniel, sit down. We're not going to her house yelling accusations. We're going to figure this out like adults." Elijah felt a flicker of gratitude toward Harper. He wasn't sure he could keep the peace on his own, and her steady presence was exactly what they needed. The four of them drove to Victoria's house that afternoon. The bungalow looked even smaller in the daylight, its weathered exterior almost blending into the overgrown garden. Victoria answered the door quickly, her expression a mix of weariness and resolve. "I've been expecting you," she said, stepping aside to let them in. The living room was cramped, the furniture old but comfortable. Victoria motioned for them to sit, but only Clara took a seat, her toddler perched on her lap. The others stood, their tension palpable. Elijah spoke first. "We know about the letter, about the sister. We need to know everything." Victoria nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Your mother made me promise to protect her secret. She carried a lot of guilt over what happened, and she didn't want to burden you with it. But she also wanted to make amends. That's why she left everything to me. She trusted me to find your sister and ensure she had what she needed." Nathaniel crossed his arms. "And have you? Found her, I mean?" Victoria hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I found her years ago, but she doesn't know who Amelia was. She grew up with a family who loved her, and your mother didn't want to disrupt her life. She asked me to wait until the time was right." Elijah felt his chest tighten. "And now?" Victoria looked at each of them in turn, her expression softening. "Now it's up to you. I can introduce you, but only if that's what you all want." The room fell silent, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. Elijah glanced at his siblings, their faces etched with uncertainty. It wasn't an easy choice, but deep down, Elijah knew what his mother would have wanted. This wasn't just about the estate or the will. It was about family. "We want to meet her," Elijah said finally, his voice steady. "All of us." Victoria nodded, a faint smile breaking across her face. "I think your mother would be proud of you for that." The decision had been made, but Elijah knew their journey was far from over. The truth had fractured their world, but it also held the potential to bring them back together in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The room remained silent after Victoria's words, the kind of heavy silence that felt almost alive. Elijah watched his siblings, searching their faces for a response. Harper sat stiffly on the edge of a chair, her hands gripping the armrests tightly. Clara hugged her toddler, the little boy squirming in her arms, oblivious to the weight of the moment. Nathaniel leaned against the wall, his expression a mask of frustration, though his tapping foot betrayed his unease. Victoria waited patiently, her gaze steady but kind. She seemed to understand the enormity of what she had just shared, as though she had been carrying the moment's weight for years, preparing for this exact confrontation. Harper broke the silence first, her voice tight but controlled. "So let me get this straight. Mom had another child, our sister, and you've known about her all this time. You've found her, but she doesn't know about us or Mom." Victoria nodded. "That's correct. Amelia wanted to protect her. She wasn't sure how you would feel, and she didn't want to disrupt your sister's life unless you were ready to meet her." Nathaniel scoffed, pushing off the wall and pacing the small living room. "Ready to meet her? How are we supposed to be ready for something like this? Mom dropped this bomb on us from the grave. We don't even know her name." "Her name is Isla," Victoria said softly. "Isla Bennett. She's in her late 20s, married and living just a few hours from here." Clara's voice broke as she spoke, her arms tightening around her son. "Does she know anything about Mom? Does she even know she was adopted?" Victoria hesitated. "She knows she's adopted, but she doesn't know the full story. Her parents were wonderful people, and Amelia wanted her to grow up without the shadow of her past weighing on her. She believed she was giving Isla the life she deserved." Elijah's mind spun, caught between disbelief and understanding. "So Mom thought she could just leave it all to you and trust that you'd figure this out? That you'd know what to do with her entire legacy?" Victoria looked directly at him, her voice firm but empathetic. Your mother trusted me because I promised to do what was best for all of you. She believed in reconciliation, but she didn't want to force it. That's why I'm leaving the decision in your hands now." Nathaniel laughed bitterly, shaking his head. How noble of her. Meanwhile, we're left to pick up the pieces of her secrets. "Enough, Nathaniel," Harper snapped, her voice sharp. "We can sit here and argue about how Mom handled this, or we can decide what we're going to do moving forward." Clara shifted in her seat, her tone quieter but no less resolute. "I want to meet her, Isla. If she's our sister, she deserves to know the truth about where she came from." Elijah nodded slowly. "I do too. But it's not just about meeting her. It's about making things right, for her and for us." All eyes turned to Nathaniel, who crossed his arms and glared at the floor. "Fine," he muttered. "If that's what everyone else wants, I'll go along with it. But don't expect me to play happy families." Victoria smiled faintly, her relief evident. "I'll contact Isla and arrange a meeting. I'll let her know just enough to prepare her, but I'll leave the rest to you." The drive to Isla Bennett's home was filled with a tense quiet, punctuated only by the occasional hum of Harper's car engine. Elijah sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window as the countryside rolled past. Nathaniel was slumped in the back seat, headphones in, while Clara, in her own car, followed behind with her toddler, asleep in his car seat. Elijah's stomach churned with anticipation. He had no idea how this meeting would go. Would Isla be open to learning about her biological family, or would she slam the door in their faces? He tried to temper his expectations, but the thought of meeting her, his sister, was both thrilling and terrifying. They arrived at a charming brick house with a tidy garden and a white picket fence. Elijah noted how different it looked from their childhood home, where overgrown weeds and peeling paint had been the norm in recent years. Harper parked on the curb, and the four siblings gathered near the gate, exchanging nervous glances. Victoria was already waiting on the porch. She waved them over, her expression calm but encouraging. "She's inside. I've told her that you're her biological siblings, and that your mother recently passed. She's nervous, but curious." Clara adjusted her toddler's jacket, her hands trembling slightly. "How do we even start a conversation like this?" "Just be honest," Victoria said, "and give her space to process. This is as new for her as it is for you." Elijah took a deep breath, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "Let's do this." Victoria opened the door and led them inside. The house smelled of fresh coffee and lavender, and soft light filtered through the large windows. Isla stood in the living room, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She was petite, with dark brown skin, curly hair tied back in a loose bun, and eyes that mirrored Amelia's in a way that made Elijah's chest tighten. "Hi," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I'm Isla." Harper stepped forward first, offering a warm smile and extending her hand. "I'm Harper. These are our siblings, Elijah, Clara, and Nathaniel." Isla nodded, her eyes darting nervously between them. "It's nice to meet you. This is all a bit overwhelming, but I'm glad you came." Clara spoke next, her voice gentle. "We didn't know about you until recently. Mom, she kept a lot to herself, but she wanted us to find you." Isla's expression softened. "Victoria told me a little about her. I've always wondered about my biological family, but my parents never had much information. They told me I was adopted, but that was about it." Elijah stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Our mom was a complicated woman. She made mistakes, but she loved fiercely, And I think finding you was her way of trying to make things right. Isla smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. It's strange. I've spent my whole life wondering where I came from, and now here you all are. It's a lot. Nathaniel finally spoke, his tone softer than Elijah had expected. It's a lot for us too. But you're family, and we want to know you, if you're willing. Isla nodded, her smile growing. I think I'd like that. The hours that followed were filled with stories, laughter, and moments of quiet reflection. Isla shared bits of her life, her love for gardening, her job as a graphic designer, her marriage to a kind-hearted man named Gabriel, who had been her rock through every challenge. In turn, the siblings told her about Amelia, their childhood, and the house that had been the center of so many memories. By the time they left, it felt as though a new chapter had begun. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still wounds to heal, questions to answer, and relationships to build, but the foundation had been laid. As they drove away from Isla's house, Harper glanced at Elijah, her voice filled with quiet determination. Mom was right about one thing. The truth is messy, but it's what brings us together. Elijah nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace. Amelia's choices had been flawed, but they had led him to this moment, to family, to understanding, and to hope for the future. The days following their meeting with Isla passed in a blur for Elijah. Returning to the family home felt different now, as though the weight of Amelia's absence had shifted. The air inside the house wasn't as heavy, but it wasn't exactly light either. It was charged with a strange, raw energy, a mixture of relief and the lingering tension of unresolved emotions. For the first time, the old walls didn't seem so much like a tomb for memories as a place brimming with potential answers. Elijah spent most of his time in the attic, digging through Amelia's belongings. Each box he opened felt like peeling back a layer of her life, one that he and his siblings had never been privy to. He wanted to piece together the timeline of her relationship with Victoria and the decision to give Isla up for adoption. There was something satisfying about combing through the artifacts, though it wasn't just about finding answers. It was also a way to keep her close, even now. Late one afternoon, he found himself poring over another stack of Amelia's letters. He was flipping through a pile of envelopes when one slipped from his grasp and landed on the floor. It was unopened, addressed to Victoria, but never mailed. Elijah hesitated for a moment, the ethical line of reading someone else's correspondence tugging at him, before deciding he needed to understand. The seal was brittle, breaking easily under his careful fingers. Victoria, the letter began. I hope this never needs to be sent, but if it is, it means I'm no longer around to explain things myself. You know I've always valued your strength, but I need to ask one more thing of you. If my children come to you, if they find Isla, please be kind to them. They will be angry, confused, maybe even hurt, but I believe in their capacity to love and forgive. I've seen it in all of them, even if they don't see it in themselves. Thank you for everything, for being my friend, my sister in all but name, and the guardian of my greatest secret. Without you, I don't think I could have survived those early years. Please tell Isla that I loved her, even if I didn't have the courage to be in her life, and tell my children that I'm proud of them, always. With love, Amelia. Elijah folded the letter slowly, his hands trembling. The words were so distinctly Amelia, her quiet wisdom, her deep sense of care, and her ever-present guilt. She had trusted Victoria with not only her secret, but also the hope that her family would find their way back to each other. Elijah sat back on his heels, the weight of the letter pressing against his chest like a stone. A knock on the attic door broke his reverie. Harper stepped inside, brushing dust off her blouse as she climbed the narrow stairs. She eyed the scattered letters and boxes, then raised an eyebrow at him. "Still digging through Mom's things?" she asked. Elijah nodded, holding up the letter. "I found this. She wrote it to Victoria, but never sent it. It's something else." Harper took the letter, her eyes scanning the page quickly. When she finished, she exhaled deeply, her shoulders sagging. That's so like her, always writing things she couldn't say out loud. Elijah leaned against a nearby trunk. She really did believe in us, didn't she? Even when we didn't believe in her. Harper handed the letter back to him, her expression softening. She did. And she was right about one thing. We need to forgive her. Not just for her mistakes, but for keeping us in the dark. Elijah hesitated before speaking. Do you think Nathaniel's ready for that? Or Clara? They're both still processing everything. Harper shrugged. I think we're all still processing, but we don't have to figure it all out at once. Meeting Isla was just the first step. There's more we need to understand. About Mom, about Victoria, and even about ourselves. The next day, the siblings gathered around the kitchen table for a family meeting. Clara had brought over pastries from a local bakery, and Nathaniel nursed a mug of coffee as he slouched in his chair. Harper, ever the organizer, had her notebook open and pen poised, ready to take notes. Elijah placed the letter in the center of the table. I found this yesterday. It's from Mom to Victoria. She wrote it in case we ever found out about Isla. Nathaniel reached for the letter, his brow furrowing as he read. When he finished, he set it down carefully, his expression unreadable. She really thought we'd forgive her for all of this? Clara's voice was quiet but firm. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was hoping we'd understand. Nathaniel scoffed. Same difference. Harper sighed, her tone tinged with exasperation. Nathaniel, this isn't about blame. It's about figuring out how we move forward. Isla's a part of our family now, whether we like it or not. And Mom wanted us to be the ones to welcome her in. Nathaniel shook his head. She's practically a stranger. We met her once for a couple of hours. That doesn't make her family. Elijah cut in, his voice steady. She is family. Whether it's by blood or by choice, she's part of this now, and Mom wanted us to include her. Clara nodded, her expression resolute. I think we should reach out to her again. Not just for Mom, but for us. We owe it to ourselves to know her better. Nathaniel sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Fine, but don't expect me to roll out the red carpet. Harper gave him a pointed look. We don't, but we do expect you to show up and try. Later that afternoon, Elijah called Isla and invited her to visit the family home. She agreed, though her voice carried a mix of excitement and nerves. Elijah reassured her as best he could, promising that this was just a chance to get to know each other better. When she arrived the following weekend, the siblings worked together to make the house feel warm and welcoming. Clara prepared a light lunch, while Harper tidied up the living room. Nathaniel, true to form, didn't do much beyond showing up, but Elijah appreciated his presence nonetheless. By the time Isla walked through the door, the house felt more alive than it had in years. Isla looked around with wide eyes, taking in the framed family photos, the worn but comfortable furniture, and the faint scent of Amelia's favorite lavender candle. "This place feels so familiar," she said softly. "Like I've been here before, even though I haven't." Harper smiled. "It's been home for a long time, and now it's part of your story, too." The afternoon passed quickly, as they shared stories about their childhoods, Amelia's quirks, and the house's history. Isla listened intently, her laughter light and genuine, as she soaked in the details of a life she had only ever imagined. Toward the end of the visit, Isla pulled out a small box she had brought with her. "I thought you might want to see this," she said, setting it on the table. Inside were photographs and letters from her adoptive parents, who had always been open about the fact that she was adopted. There was also a single photo of Amelia, sent to her adoptive parents at their request. It was the only connection Isla had ever had to her biological mother. Elijah picked up the photo, his chest tightening. It was a picture of Amelia in her 20s, her smile bright and carefree. It reminded him of the old photographs he had found in the attic, the ones with Victoria. "She always looked so happy," Isla said, her voice soft. "I used to stare at this photo and wonder what she was like." Clara reached across the table, placing her hand over Isla's. "Now you know. And she would have been so proud of you." The room fell silent, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes with understanding, with connection, with the beginnings of something new. Elijah glanced at his siblings, then back at Isla. For the first time, he felt like they weren't just finding their way through Amelia's secrets. They were finding their way back to each other. The house was quieter after Isla left, but it didn't feel empty. Elijah stood by the window, watching the taillights of her car disappear down the street. He exhaled slowly, trying to process the weight of the day. The visit had gone better than he'd expected, but it had stirred up more emotions than he was ready to confront. Behind him, Clara gathered the empty plates from the coffee table. Harper was flipping through her notebook, jotting down thoughts in her precise handwriting. Nathaniel sat slouched in an armchair, arms crossed, staring into the distance. "She's nice," Clara said finally, breaking the silence. "It's strange, though. She looks so much like Mom, but she's nothing like her at the same time." Harper nodded. "She has a lot of our mannerisms. Did you notice how she tucks her hair behind her ear when she's nervous? Mom used to do that." Nathaniel let out a huff of breath, leaning forward. "Yeah, but we barely know her. One visit doesn't make her part of the family. It's going to take more than a couple of shared habits to make this normal." Elijah turned from the window, his voice calm but firm. "No one said it has to feel normal right away. This is new for all of us, Nathaniel, but she's trying. That's more than enough for now." Nathaniel shrugged, his tone still guarded. "Maybe. I'm just saying it's weird." Clara placed the plates in the sink, wiping her hands on a towel. "Of course it's weird. Everything about this situation is weird. But Mom wanted us to meet her, and now we have. That's a start." Elijah nodded, glancing at Harper. "What's next, then?" "We've met Isla, but there's still so much we don't know. About her, about Mom, and about Victoria's role in all of this." Harper tapped her pen against her notebook, her brow furrowing. "I think we need to talk to Victoria again. There are gaps in Mom's story, and Victoria is the only one who can fill them in." Nathaniel rolled his eyes. "Great. More secrets from the woman who somehow convinced Mom to give her everything." Harper shot him a sharp look. "You know that's not what happened. Mom made her decision, and Victoria carried it out. This isn't about blame, Nathaniel. It's about understanding. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, muttering under his breath, but he didn't argue further. Clara, sensing the tension, changed the subject. What about the house? Are we keeping it? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. The family home had been a source of both comfort and conflict for years, and now, with Amelia gone, its future felt uncertain. Harper glanced at Elijah, who had been the most invested in preserving the house. What do you think, Eli? Should we keep it? Elijah hesitated, his gaze drifting to the worn floorboards. It's not just a house. It's where we grew up. It's part of who we are. But if we're going to keep it, it has to mean something. It can't just sit here, empty and full of memories. Clara nodded, her voice soft. Maybe it could be a place for Isla, too. A way for her to feel connected to Mom. Nathaniel snorted. She has her own life. She doesn't need this place. Elijah's jaw tightened. Maybe she doesn't need it, but maybe we do. For once, we have a chance to do something right, to bring this family together instead of tearing it apart. The room fell silent again, the weight of Elijah's words settling over them. Harper closed her notebook, her expression thoughtful. Let's talk to Victoria. Maybe she can help us figure out what Mom would have wanted. The next morning, Elijah and Harper drove to Victoria's bungalow. The small house was as unassuming as ever, its peeling shutters and overgrown garden unchanged. Victoria greeted them at the door with her usual calm demeanor, stepping aside to let them in. I thought I might be seeing you again, Victoria said as she led them into the living room. What's on your mind? Harper sat on the couch, her notebook balanced on her knee. We have questions about Mom, about Isla, and about what she wanted for the house. Victoria nodded, folding her hands in her lap. I'll tell you whatever I can. Elijah leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. Did Mom ever say anything about the house? About what she wanted us to do with it? Victoria sighed, her gaze distant. She loved that house. It was her sanctuary, especially after your father passed. But in her later years, she worried it would become a burden. She talked about selling it, but she could never bring herself to make the decision. Harper jotted down notes, her pen scratching softly against the paper. What about Isla? Did she ever say how she envisioned Isla being part of our family? Victoria hesitated, her expression thoughtful. Amelia wanted Isla to feel like she belonged, but she didn't want to force it. She hoped you would take the lead, that you'd find a way to welcome her in without overwhelming her. Elijah frowned, his voice tinged with frustration. She left a lot up to us, didn't she? Victoria met his gaze, her tone gentle. She trusted you. She believed in your ability to make the right choices, even if she didn't always say it out loud. Harper closed her notebook, her expression softening. There's one more thing we need to know. Mom wrote about a time when you helped her through something. She called you her guardian. What did she mean by that? Victoria's face softened, a hint of sadness flickering in her eyes. Amelia and I went through a lot together. When she made the decision to give Isla up for adoption, it broke her in ways she didn't expect. She leaned on me to get through it. I was there for her, not just as a friend, but as someone who could carry the weight of her choices when she couldn't. Elijah's chest tightened. Did she regret it? Victoria shook her head. Not regret. Sadness, maybe. Grief for the life she imagined but couldn't have. But she knew it was the right choice for Isla, and she believed that one day the truth would bring all of you together. Harper stood, her voice steady. It's time we make that happen. Over the next few weeks, the siblings worked together to bring life back into the family home. They repaired the peeling paint, trimmed the overgrown garden, and filled the rooms with laughter and shared memories. They invited Isla over regularly, sharing stories and traditions that helped her feel connected to the mother she had never known. Nathaniel, though still guarded, began to soften. He helped Clara's toddler build a fort in the living room, his laughter filling the space in a way that surprised even him. Harper took charge of organizing family dinners, her meticulous planning ensuring that everyone felt included. Elijah spent hours in the attic, sorting through Amelia's belongings and creating a memory wall that honored her life and legacy. When the house was finally ready, they held a gathering for friends and family. Victoria was among the first to arrive, her presence a quiet reminder of the woman who had brought them all together. Isla stood by the memory wall, her eyes scanning the photographs and letters with a mixture of wonder and sadness. She would have loved this, Isla said softly, her hand brushing over a photograph of Amelia. Thank you for sharing it with me. Elijah stood beside her, his voice steady. You're part of this family now, Isla. Mom would have wanted you to feel that. As the evening unfolded, the house buzzed with life, the walls echoing with laughter and conversation. For the first time in years, it felt like a home again, a place where the past and the present could coexist, where secrets had been transformed into connections. Elijah glanced around the room, his heart full. Amelia's choices hadn't been perfect, but they had led to this moment. A family brought together not by blood alone, but by the determination to heal and grow. The family home buzzed with new life, but beneath the surface, Elijah felt the weight of unspoken tension. Though the siblings had welcomed Isla into their lives, the process of truly blending their family was proving more complicated than any of them had anticipated. Nathaniel was still distant, his interactions with Isla polite but cool. Harper struggled to balance her role as the family's peacemaker with her own unresolved emotions about Amelia's secrets. Clara, juggling motherhood and the growing bond with Isla, was the only one who seemed completely at peace with the situation. Elijah, however, felt stuck. His role as the family's unofficial historian had given him a deeper understanding of Amelia, but it also left him feeling disconnected. He spent long hours in the attic, sorting through her belongings, searching for something he couldn't quite name. Answers, closure, or perhaps just a way to move forward. One afternoon, as he sifted through a box of old journals, Elijah came across a set of documents he hadn't seen before. The pages were yellowed with age, and the handwriting was unfamiliar. At the top of one page was the name Bennett Adoption Agency. His heart skipped a beat as he realized what he was holding. These were the papers from Isla's adoption, evidence of Amelia's decision to give up her firstborn child. Elijah's eyes scanned the documents, taking in the details, dates, signatures, and notes from social workers who had facilitated the process. One line in particular caught his attention. Biological father. Name withheld by request. His brow furrowed. Amelia had never mentioned Isla's father, and it wasn't something that had come up in any of her letters or journals. He wondered if Victoria might know, or if the truth had been lost to time. He hesitated, then decided to share the papers with his siblings. This was something they all deserved to see, even if it stirred up more questions than answers. That evening, they gathered around the dining room table, the adoption papers spread out before them. Harper leaned over the documents, her expression unreadable. Nathaniel sat with his arms crossed, a frown etched deeply into his face. Clara held Isla's hand tightly, her support evident. Elijah cleared his throat. I found these in a box of Mom's things. They're from the adoption agency that handled Isla's case. Isla's eyes widened, her voice soft. I've never seen these before. My parents told me about the adoption, but they didn't have many details. Harper traced a finger along the lines of text, her brow furrowing. Name withheld by request, she murmured. Do you think Mom knew who your father was? Isla shrugged, her tone hesitant. It's possible, but if she did, she never tried to contact him, at least not that I know of. Nathaniel scoffed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Another secret. Shocking. Clara shot him a sharp look. Nathaniel, don't. No, really, Nathaniel continued, his tone growing bitter. It's just one thing after another with Mom. How many more skeletons are we going to find in her closet? Elijah's voice was firm. This isn't about Mom's mistakes. It's about Isla, and about understanding her place in this family. Nathaniel rolled his eyes, but he didn't argue further. Isla, sensing the tension, spoke up. I don't need to know everything about my father. I've made peace with not having that connection. What matters to me is being here with all of you. Clara squeezed her hand. And we're glad you're here. Harper nodded, her voice thoughtful. Still, it's strange that Mom never mentioned anything about him. She was so thorough in her letters and journals, but this part of the story is missing. Elijah leaned back in his chair, the pieces of the puzzle swirling in his mind. Maybe Victoria knows. She was there for Mom during that time. If anyone has answers, it's her. The siblings arranged another meeting with Victoria the next day, this time at the family home. She arrived in the early afternoon, her expression calm but curious as she stepped inside. The house felt different to her now, warmer, more alive. She noted the changes the siblings had made, the small touches that spoke of their efforts to reclaim the space as their own. Elijah wasted no time, placing the adoption papers on the coffee table. We found these in Mom's things. Do you know anything about Isla's father? Victoria studied the documents, her expression unreadable. She sat down slowly, folding her hands in her lap. Your mother never told me his name, but I know she carried the weight of that relationship for a long time. Harper tilted her head. What do you mean? Victoria sighed, her gaze distant. Amelia was young, barely out of high school when she met him. He was older, charming, but not the kind of man who stuck around. When she found out she was pregnant, he made it clear he didn't want to be involved. She didn't even tell him about the adoption. She just let him go. Isla's voice was quiet but steady. Do you think he ever thought about her? About me? Victoria's eyes softened. I don't know, Isla, but I do know that your mother thought about you every single day. She made the decision she thought was best for both of you, even if it broke her heart. Nathaniel scoffed, leaning against the wall. Great. Another man who walked away. Seems like a pattern in this family. Elijah shot him a warning look. That's enough, Nathaniel. This isn't about your resentment. It's about the truth. Victoria met Nathaniel's gaze, her tone firm. Your mother didn't give up Isla because she wanted to. She did it because she had no other choice. If you're going to judge her for that, then you don't understand the kind of strength it took. The room fell silent, the weight of Victoria's words settling over them. Elijah glanced at Isla, who was staring at the papers with a mixture of curiosity and sadness. He wanted to say something, to comfort her, but he wasn't sure how. Clara broke the silence, her voice gentle. Maybe it's better that we don't know everything. Sometimes the truth only makes things harder. Harper nodded slowly. She's right. We have enough to piece together Mom's story, and that's enough. What matters now is what we do moving forward. Elijah leaned forward, his voice steady. Mom wanted us to be a family. That's what we need to focus on. Victoria smiled faintly, her expression one of quiet pride. Amelia would be proud of all of you. You've come so far already. Over the next few weeks, the siblings continued to work on strengthening their bond with Isla. They shared more stories about Amelia, inviting Isla to take part in family traditions that had once felt too painful to revisit. Nathaniel, though still guarded, began to thaw, his sarcasm giving way to moments of genuine connection. Harper and Clara became Isla's closest allies, offering her guidance and support as she navigated her newfound place in the family. Elijah, for his part, found solace in the process of rebuilding, not just the house, but the relationships that had been fractured by years of distance and misunderstanding. The memory wall in the living room grew with each passing week, filled with photographs, letters, and mementos that celebrated Amelia's life and legacy. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Isla stood and raised her glass. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke, but her words carried a quiet strength. I just want to say thank you, she began, her eyes sweeping across the table, for welcoming me into your lives, for sharing your memories of Mom, and for making me feel like I belong. I know this hasn't been easy, but it means everything to me. Clara reached out and squeezed Isla's hand, her smile warm. You belong here, Isla. We're glad you're with us. The rest of the family echoed her sentiment, their voices blending in a chorus of agreement. For the first time in years, the house felt whole, a place where the past and present could coexist, where secrets had been transformed into connections. Elijah looked around the table, his heart full. Amelia's choices had been complicated, her legacy messy, but they had led to this moment. And in the end, that was enough. The family home hummed with a quiet peace that had been absent for years. The final repairs were complete, the walls freshly painted, and the garden blooming with new life. Elijah stood by the memory wall, his fingers grazing a photograph of Amelia, holding a young Isla, the image newly framed and added to the collection. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment, not just in preserving the house, but in preserving what it represented. Harper entered the room, holding a tray of glasses. Everyone's in the dining room. You coming? Elijah nodded. Just taking it all in for a moment. Harper smiled. It's amazing what we've done here. I think Mom would be proud. As Elijah followed her into the dining room, he was greeted by the sight of his siblings laughing around the table. Clara was helping her toddler into a booster seat. Nathaniel was pouring wine, and Isla sat at the head of the table, her expression radiant. For the first time, the space felt alive, brimming with connection and joy. Isla raised her glass, her voice steady and full of emotion. To family, for finding each other, for growing together, and for honoring Mom's memory. The glasses clinked as everyone echoed her toast, their smiles warm and genuine. Elijah felt a lump rise in his throat, but swallowed it down, focusing instead on the contentment that filled the room. This was what Amelia had wanted. A family united not by perfection, but by love and understanding. After dinner, Elijah lingered in the living room, the hum of conversation fading into the background. He picked up one of Amelia's journals, thumbing through its well-worn pages. Her words spoke of hope, of regret, and of her dreams for her children. In her quiet way, she had laid the foundation for the reconciliation they were now living. Nathaniel approached, a rare smile playing on his lips. "You did good, Eli. I wasn't sure about all of this, but you were right. This house, it's more than just a building." Elijah chuckled. "I didn't do it alone. We all made this happen." Nathaniel nodded, his expression softening. "Still, you held us together. Mom would have been proud of that." The compliment took Elijah by surprise, but he simply nodded, his chest swelling with gratitude. The pieces of their fractured family had finally come together, forming something whole and enduring. As the evening wound down, Isla stood by the door, hugging each sibling before leaving. When she embraced Elijah, her voice was soft. "Thank you for letting me be part of this. It means more than I can say." "Your family," Elijah replied. "That's all that matters." As the door closed behind her, Elijah turned to the memory wall one last time. Amelia's photograph seemed to smile back at him, her presence lingering in the air. For the first time in years, Elijah felt complete. You've made it to the end. If you enjoyed this story, I am confident that you'll love the next one appearing on the screen now. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and please give this video a like. I'll see you in the next one.